welcome, Deborah. How are you, Miss Deborah?
Είμαι καλά. Γεια σου σε όλους τους φίλους μου στην Ελλάδα.
Oh, very well, very well. It was very well. So let's begin with our interview now. We had Ντέμπορα Σαντάνα with us to talk to us about the elections in Puerto Rico. Let's say I have the first question. Let's go to the answer for the first question.
Yes, well, thank you. I think the first thing I should say is that in Puerto Rico, we have regular elections, but this is a colony of the United States. We have no sovereignty, and we have a fiscal control board, Junta de Control Fiscal, or Junta, that has been put in place since 2016 to try to overrule everything here to privatize and sell off and cut the budget in order to pay colonial debt to the Wall Street vultures. So this is the context under which we have our elections. Also in Puerto Rico, we do not vote for anything in the United States. For example, we don't vote for the US president. We have no voting representation. We have a non-voting commissioner who we did vote for here, but that person does not have a vote in the US Congress. So, and we have many people who do not vote here because they say, well, this is a colonial, it's useless. But that being said, most people do vote because we vote for the local administrators of the colony, you might say. So, and we just had our elections where we voted for governor, for the legislature, and for the municipalities, our mayors and our municipal assembly representatives. We also had a non-binding referendum that was placed by the ruling party here, which I'll describe in a minute, in order to bring out the vote of their supporters. And that non-binding referendum was statehood, sí or no? Do we want to become the 51st state of the United States or no?
Yes.
There is a party called in English the New Progressive Party, Partido Nuevo Progresista, or PNP that we call here, and their hook is statehood for Puerto Rico. This is where we will have equality. Of course, if you know the United States, you know that being a state has nothing to do with equality, but that's how they grab people. And they had the largest base of faithful voters in Puerto Rico. Probably about 40% of the electorate would say that they support statehood, really. So then there are other people who vote yes or no, and then you have the other parties as well. So that is basically what took place the same day as the elections in the United States, but with a lot of different features. For example, we don't have the same political parties that they do. We have our own, the PNP, which I just mentioned. The other major party, the Popular Democratic Party, Partido Popular Democrático, and their view is the status point is not the issue. Okay, that's the important thing, is having a good government, and we want autonomy. We want our present relationship, but with some autonomy, which of course we don't have. But that's their viewpoint, and they were the party in power for a long time, and now they alternate with the PNP. The interesting thing here is that there was a new narrative that came up with this elections, that the major problem in Puerto Rico was el bipartidismo, bipartisanship. That was our major problem, and we had to defeat el bipartidismo without talking about our real problem, which is we're a colony. And we don't have the right to make our own decisions. That's the part of it. So that was the context for these elections. The other thing that you asked me quite rightly, well, what was different? What was new about these elections? Because we've had these types of elections for many years. I would say that the thing that was most new here, and it's not that it was completely new, because there's these processes that have been happening for years. You know, nothing that's new is actually really new, right? Maybe it becomes more visible. Yes, yes. This is the first election, we know it's every 4 years. This is the first election we've had since the Junta de Control Fiscal was put in place. And we have like another government paid for by us, but imposed by the United States, that basically grabs onto our budget, says what you can do, what you can't do, and whose only reason for being there is to take as much money as possible to give to the creditors in Wall Street. That's really the only reason they are here. So that's the first thing. The other thing is, since 2016, we had a very ruinous Hurricane Maria, which of course people in Greece are familiar with. But I would say the disaster was Maria, but the catastrophe was the government's response to Maria. Not only the local government, which is plagued by corruption, of course, but also the US government's response. So you have basically, we slowly have recovered, and not completely, because of what the people, we ourselves, have done. Of course, with of course friends and support from people outside of the United States. But it was, exactly, it was our community. We're the ones who really put things together, pasted it back together. All right. Then, of course, we've had, in the beginning of 2020, we had a series of very ruinous earthquakes in the southwestern part of Puerto Rico that did a tremendous amount of damage. And of course, the government's response was, again, withholding aid, corruption, because they were thinking of how they could use the aid to advance their political campaign. So, and this is the same thing with Maria, with, of course, unnecessary damage, which you could have done, and in the case of Maria, a far greater loss of life than we should have had. Of course, the pandemic, which all of us are dealing with, but in case you have a corrupt, capitalist, colonial government that is thinking mostly about how to profit and very little about how to have an effective response to a pandemic, right? So we have that as well. And just also in 2019, because of several scandals in Puerto Rico in the summer of 2019, there was a mass movement here aimed at forcing the governor to resign, which we succeeded. Now, he was replaced by someone else in his own government, PNP, so we didn't really get rid of the major problem, but it also made people think that we have power. Yes, this was a mass movement. There was a series of mass protests for almost a month, that with a protest that had up to 1 million people. Now we have a little over 3 million people living in Puerto Rico right now. That, by any standards, is a mass movement, where you can get 1/3 of your population in the streets. All right, and so this was the context. And then, of course, these new political parties.
I'm sorry I interrupt you, but it must be all the adults who could. They came to these demonstrations, if I understand. If you say out of the population, all the adults who could come did come.
Exactly. And of course, everyone says, well, we had all our big names were there too. Ricky Martin was there. Bad Bunny was there, Calle 13, all our big stars that are known all over the world, but they're not the reason that this was happening. They, of course, made a big promotion, which helped, but that's not the reason that the protests happened. So, so this is the context for which, and then already what was chipping away at the credibility and the support for the two major parties, which was beginning to coalesce into a new party, several new parties, one that has more information on than the other. And I'm glad that we're talking, because I have a lot of information on the other one also, which is not talked about in the news. There was a new movement not so new, some would say, that became a political party. And it's difficult to register political parties here because we follow the US bi-party system. However, it's much easier in Puerto Rico than it is in the United States, because all of the candidates for all of the parties were able to get on the television for debates and have, they don't have maybe the funding that the major parties have, but they were all on and they all actually talked about their issues, which you don't see in the United States at all. All right. Yes. So that, in a sense, you know, that's also a difference. So let me talk about the two new parties. One new party is called Movimiento Victoria Ciudadana, the movement of citizens' victory. Okay, Victoria Ciudadana, and it was a coalition, alliance, you might say, of people who want to see an end to the corruption of the two major parties and want to offer clean government. Yeah. Most of the people involved who ran as candidates have never been in, you know, in the government. Some of them have, and we were looking at the major candidates. They didn't run a full slate of candidates, but the ones that they had, most of them were lawyers. And I made the point, well, the only one in the major candidates that wasn't a lawyer is a university professor. But they said they're, you know, we are representing the people. All right. Okay. Yeah, I see. So, and the way that they try to get people from all the different parties, the ones who support statehood, the ones who support some kind of autonomy, the ones who were independentistas, and trying to attract everybody. So they make the status issue not the issue, but they will say we want decolonization. But when you press them on what is that, well, all the options, including statehood, is a form of decolonization, which, if you know anything about international law and about the resolutions in the United Nations, an absorption of a colony by the colonizer is not decolonization, and especially not if they're geographically separated and the culture is completely different. Yeah, of course. So, but it's a lie. The statehood people will say that if you want decolonization, go for statehood, but they lie. That's part of their, you know, that's part of their thing. It's another thing for a new movement, including people, some people who claim to be independentistas, to accept that lie, which, me personally, it's the biggest problem I have with this new party. I don't think, I understand that you want to attract people from all different points of view. I understand that, but I don't think it's a good idea to win based on lies. Yes, of course, of course. And somehow to trust them to do good government when I know that, you know, I would rather lose with honesty than win by trying to
we understand you perfectly, I must say.
Yeah, this is my big problem with them. Okay, then there's another party that they don't talk much about in the news, and I think they should. And the people, and this is another problem with the difference between a party like Victoria Ciudadana, which is based really in San Juan, in the metropolitan system. Granted, the metropolitan area has 1/3 of the population. That's true. But you can know a lot about San Juan, about living in the big metro area, and not know anything about the rest of the country. I think I live in the country. Yeah. I know, and I know people here are profoundly conservative, profoundly religious, and they basically organized a new party based out of the fundamentalist Christian churches, which are very powerful in Puerto Rico, outside of the metropolitan area. They didn't go on they had their own social media and all that, but they weren't on they basically went from church to church. Yeah. They went to the pastors of the churches, got lists and went to their people, and they formed a new party called Proyecto Dignidad, the Dignity Project. And they ended up with 7% of the vote, and they put a representative in both houses of the legislature. And now they want to go for more. I'm sure they will have, they didn't have candidates for everything. In the municipalities, they didn't have mayor candidate, but I think this time they will, because they have a taste.
Yeah, I see.
So that, and their entire platform, if you look at the platform, they're not particularly a platform where statehood, or they have members from different tendencies, but the major part of their platform is return to, or holding on to, the patriarchal system of family, and you know, the man is the head, the woman is, no gender perspective in education, none of that type, and absolutely women's right to choose and abortion or not, no, and especially no rights forever for gays, lesbians, bisexuals, transgenders. That I think that's even a bigger issue for them than abortion, to be honest, because I know how they also, some of them have connections with the extreme right-wing religious groups in Latin America. But that's not well known, because you have to know somebody who's connected with them to know that. And I happen to know people who do.
Because our time is running out.
Yes.
I would like to ask you, so now after the elections, how is the situation in Puerto Rico, and what do you expect from now on?
Yes.
And if you can tell us just 2 words about the United States elections itself.
Yes, and I'm sorry, I did go long in that. But the biggest surprise, I think, for some people is that the Partido Independentista, the Independence Party, which has suffered for many years from very low votes, primarily because independence has been demonized, and also because there's a lot of divisions among independentistas, and many independentistas don't support the party. It went from 2016, where we won 2% of the governor vote, to 14%.
Yes, that I read that. It is impressive,
Very impressive. It's true that some people who don't support independence voted for the candidate for governor, who ran a wonderful campaign and is very charismatic, named is Juan Dalmau. But that's not the only reason. They ran candidates for all of the positions, including at the municipal level, and the majority of the candidates are young. So you have a completely renovated system that we will see the impacts in the coming year. They also had the only well-developed government plan for government that's very, and I helped in one of the areas. So, but you know, it's mostly the younger people that worked on this, which we're going to be working on implementing, even though we're not controlling the government. We also our major candidates for the legislature we're in. We will have representatives in all of the municipalities, although not, you know. So I think that is very, very important. It also shows that many people, even who are not necessarily pro-independence, have lost their fear of voting for an independence candidate, and that is a very, very important thing. And so for me, it's helpful.
It is a new page for Puerto Rico history, I think.
Yes, yes.
Of course, the articles, but I think it is too.
Yes, I think, and I personally, I don't believe that independence will come through voting in a colonial election. I don't believe that either. But there are other reasons. So you know, and the internationally, it's very important for them to know that we have people who support independence here. I do want to mention a little bit in the time that we have about the U.S. Elections, and you know, as you know, I lived for many years in the United States. I did vote there for a time, and yes, I do have to say that what we are seeing now with the absolute divisions, with the support for a Democratic Party alternative to the Republicans, to Trump, is about as neoliberal as you can imagine. And of course, almost no votes for anyone outside of those. It's mainly the Joe Biden, former Vice President, former Senator Joe Biden. Should be no surprise, his background to people in Greece who follow the elections in the United States, in politics here. If anything, he is more warlike and warmongering than Donald Trump, who don't get me wrong, there is nothing I support about Donald Trump, and I think he needs to not be there. He never should have been there. If anything, Biden will be more supportive of U.S. Pentagon adventures, work adventures in throughout the world. What it is imperialist aggression, but with a much nicer language.
Yeah, I see.
And then the people in the European Union and others can go back to supporting, U.S. policy again, with a clean conscience, because they don't have a brute like Trump, who, among all the horrible things he said, he's actually said many truths about the miserable U.S. system, the miserable excuse for a democracy, which is not a democracy, which has never been a democracy. The reason that Biden has apparently won the Democratic, and it's not final yet, but I believe he did win, was because no Trump. And you had a very, very high turnout for U.S. standards, over 60, maybe about 65% of the, maybe as high as 65% of the voting population, which by U.S. standards is very high, because most of the time, no more than 50% of the people who even registered bothered to vote, because they don't really believe in the system. But because in the United States you have a tremendous ignorance, they don't, the C words,
it will end
colonialism.
Shortly, no, Zoom will end.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. You have an incredibly divided U.S. population that does not really articulate its own class interests well. They're dying for a lack of a public healthcare system that cannot handle this pandemic, even if they had a good government with a good scientific response. Even then they would be dying, maybe not in the numbers that they are now, but it still would be bad, because they don't have a public healthcare system. And so it is a tragedy. It's a real tragedy. I'm not optimistic about the Biden administration. I think the struggle needs to continue, and it needs to continue even without Trump as the flashpoint. So, and of course it affects us in Puerto Rico. So,
I want to thank you very much. We're running out of time, I'm afraid. And I hope everything will be all right in the recording, and we will repeat it sometime.
My pleasure. Whenever you want. Oti alo feliz, otan feliz.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Debora, very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.